How does physical trauma affect the mind?
How does physical trauma affect the mind? Classical conditioning. You're like Pavlov's dog. Pavlov's dog learns to salivate when it hears the bell because it associates the bell with food, and food is automatically through evolution associated with eating, digestion, etc. So the salivation starts. Pain through evolution is associated with fear automatically, right? So when you have that fall, that injury, or whatever it is, your brain just automatically wires that together. I mean, you see that in sea slugs, right? They have classical conditioning. This isn't a human thing. Almost every species shows classical conditioning. So pain and fear go hand in hand. Now, it depends on the intensity of the pain. There's something called one trial learning. You can have such a traumatic event that's all it takes to wire your brain to that fear. Other times it's repeated things. Pavlov's dogs, that's not a super traumatic event. They had to be exposed to that sequence of bell and food over and over again. So when we talk about trauma and climbing, it's usually related to, one incident or a small number of incidents. But yeah, your brain gets wired for that. But the thing is, you can rewire it. And the easiest way to do that is exposure training. There's all types of psychotherapy, but exposure training is one based on behaviorism that is incredibly effective. If you're afraid of snakes, they can get you holding snakes in 2 weeks just through exposure therapy. If you're afraid of falling, practice falling, right? So if you've had that trauma, I personally think dwelling on it and waiting to get back on the horse can backfire, because the longer you put it off, the longer you're dealing with that fear and the longer your brain is wired that way. I thought I was going to die in a fall about 5 years ago. I really thought this was it. This is the end, and screamed such. Nobody around. I was rope soloing, and I tore up my hands in the fall. But when I still had bandages on my hands, I got back on the rope in a gym and started climbing again. And people asked me, "Are you going to be afraid to go back?" And I was like, "No, I don't think so." And I got back to climbing right away, and I even went back to that crag, and it didn't even really occur to me. Partially because I think I'd taken, as a sport climber, I'd taken thousands of falls before that were safe. So just because something went wrong one time, and especially under that circumstance, because it was a judgment failure on my part, and I could just say prefrontal cortex, tamp down the fear of the amygdala and the limbic system and say, look, this isn't going to happen again because I'm not putting myself in that exact situation. I'm not going to make that mistake again. But I do think the longer we avoid it, and there's lots of research on this, it's actually called negative reinforcement. Some people think negative reinforcement is punishment, but it's not. Negative reinforcement is when you take away something bad. So I've got a headache, I take aspirin, my headache goes away, I feel better, right? I'm not like floating, I'm not tripping out, I just feel normal again. But normal is better than bad. That's negative reinforcement. So every time you worry about, I've got this opportunity for public speaking, it's coming up. No, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to put it off for another week. Every time you do that, that's negative reinforcement. And just like Pavlov's dogs, you're training yourself to avoid what it is you're afraid of. And it just makes it harder. You're wiring those neurons to want to avoid that thing in the future. You're rewarding yourself by not doing what you're afraid of. I mean, of course, you've got to be realistic. Get back on the rock on something safe. Maybe get back on something easy. Be with the most trusted belayer, closest friend you have, on some easy, super well-protected climb. Minimize the fear and ease your way back into it. But that's the combo that I would recommend, is not delay it. It's get back on the horse, but ease your way back onto the horse. Pick a little pony to start your way back. And I think that's based on good science.
What kind of exercises can someone do to heal from the fear that comes from the trauma?
Yeah, in terms of exercises to get past trauma, desensitization training, if you're afraid of snakes, for example, they would have you, number one, practice relaxation techniques so you know how to get yourself relaxed mentally and physically. Scan your body for tension, think about your breathing, think about your heart rate, kind of the feedback mechanism. Can I control that? And yeah, we can all control it, and practice makes it better. Now put yourself in a somewhat stressful situation, think about that snake, or, think about climbing in a safe situation. It still makes you nervous. Calm yourself down. You can do that for a while. It's super effective. Maybe even watch climbing, watch videos, watch people climbing live, and, try to maintain your physical state as relaxed as you can. All of that's practice, but ultimately it's going to be getting back on the rock. And I think what you want to do there is you just want to get back in the safest possible situation that you can design for yourself, with a trusted belayer, maybe a moderately easy climb, something that you absolutely know you're not going to fall off of, with good protection on a nice sunny day. Just make it a happy experience. You can kind of override those negative emotions with positive emotions. Don't expect for yourself that you're going to go out and in one day overcome this. That's unrealistic. Be realistic about it. Be easy on yourself. If the day feels wrong, really use that prefrontal cortex and say, am I letting my fear rule me? Because avoidance learning can be devastatingly bad for us. It's rewarding to say, this thing scares me, I'm starting to feel worried. Okay, I'm not going to do it today. I feel so much better. You've just reinforced that behavior. So then you go out to the crag the next day and you say, I'm going to take this on today, but I'm getting really nervous. Today's not the day, and talk yourself out of it. And every time you do that, you're just building the wall taller and taller. So you've got to face that fear, but you can try to set up the situation to minimize the fear so it's not such a hurdle for you. I can think of very specific examples. A climbing partner who's afraid of falling. And we talked about this, exposure therapy. You just need to take on a bolt, and you need to climb a foot above the bolt, or don't even climb above the bolt. Just be at the bolt. I'll give you 1 foot of slack, and you'll drop a foot, 2 feet with ropes, stretch, etc. Do that. And we'd be driving out to the cliff, and he'd say, today's the day. I'm going to do it. I'm going to take falls today. I swear I'm going to take falls today. Nope, today's not the day. And 2 weeks later, today's the day. I'm going to take falls. Nope, today's not the day. That's not just procrastinating. That's wiring your brain in the wrong direction.
What kind of mental toughness deficits can someone expect to see after experiencing a physical trauma from falling?
Well, if you've had a trauma to the point where it's physical, even just a mental trauma, you're rewiring the brain to some degree. So there's going to be more fear. That's just absolutely natural. And with that fear, what it does, our brain is arranged in a sense in neural networks, similar topics. For example, if we start talking about Skinner, a famous psychologist, as soon as we start talking about Skinner, my brain goes to all the connections I know with Skinner, because it's almost like throwing a pebble in the water and the ripple goes out and it activates those related areas. And it's an electrochemical reaction that happens because neurons work electrochemically. So it's called spreading activation. So once you get that fear thinking going, you're more likely to think of more fears, like, oh, this could go wrong, that could go wrong. So expect that, and realize you're going to have to work to overcome that. There are many examples of that. It goes along with the idea of priming. If you watch a sad movie and then somebody asks you for your earliest childhood memories, that neural network, that spreading activation, even the emotion of sadness, is going to connect you with more sad memories than happy memories from your childhood. So it's a very automatic passive mechanism that happens in the brain. And certainly with fear, once you've thrown that fear pebble into those neural networks of your brain, those ripples are going to go out and raise these other issues, raise these other fears. But you've got to engage conscious thinking and coping and say, all right, this is my brain reacting. I went through something bad. That was an unusual circumstance. I'm not going to let it happen again. Maybe you've analyzed what went wrong, like with the big fall I took a few years ago. I know what I did wrong. It's easy never to do that again. That was kind of a bad judgment call with gear. So you've got to be expecting those things. And there's another psychological principle that we wrote about in Vertical Mind that's very appropriate here, and that's spontaneous recovery. if you've worked to get yourself comfortable falling, you've done the habituation thing, you've taken practice falls, or you've been climbing for a long time, and you stop doing it, your brain goes back to its sort of default state of fear of falling. Your fear of falling is going to increase again. If you've had a period away from anything, you're going to be a little bit rusty at that, but even the emotional aspect of it, the emotional control is going to be rusty. So just because you've gone through the drill of getting over fear of falling, it's not going to just stick with you for the rest of your life. Time away, it's going to come back again. So go easy on yourself. Expect that that's going to happen. But the interesting thing, there are hundreds, thousands of studies that demonstrate this, relearning is always faster, or unlearning something that you've unlearned before. So if you've habituated to falling and gotten comfortable with falling, and now you've had a bad experience, or just time away, so now that the fear comes back again, you can habituate more quickly the second time around. It might just be a day of practice falls and, oh, I'm back to normal.
Some people after a fall have something permanently, physically different.
Mm-hmm.
Our co-host for the episode is going to be Craig DiMartino.
Oh, I know Craig.
Yeah!
I knew Craig before the fall. Obviously with some trauma, some accidents, there are things that are going to stick with you. Loss of a limb perhaps, or loss of some sort of function. And that's always going to be a reminder of what happened. So under those circumstances, as opposed to somebody, like myself, who tore my hands apart in a fall grabbing the rope when I thought I was going to die, those wounds heal. Now the psychological wounds we've talked about, how to heal those, right? Get back on the horse, etc. But with that constant reminder, it's going to be tougher. And I really admire the people who have gone through those situations. And I admire both the people who said, all right, I enjoyed climbing, but it's not worth going back to, right? I know what my priorities are. I know what makes me happy in life. That risk is no longer interesting to me, or the ROI, the return, my joy return on the investment of risk isn't worth it. Now for people who say, this is a one-off situation, or I know how I can prevent it in the future, or I'll be safe, I'll minimize risk. Sure, it could happen again, or something similar could go wrong, but I'm willing to face those fears. Then I think the process is similar, it's just all amped up. It's all more difficult. So absolutely great admiration for people who are willing to take that on and get through that. I knew Craig way back in the day, Fort Collins, before his accident, and I was up in the park that day when it happened and went to visit him in the hospital afterwards. And Craig's a role model for a lot of people in the world. I certainly look up to him for so many reasons. He was an awesome human being before the accident, and has just become more awesome in my experience. Last time I saw Craig, I'm pretty sure it was at Ten Sleep, and this sticks in my head because there were kids at the crag who had been through an accident themselves, and I think they were self-conscious over some of the injuries that they had and some of the lasting effects, which ended up resolving over the years, to the best of my knowledge anyway. But Craig was so cool with them. He's like, hey, I went through an accident too. Check this out. My leg comes off, and he was very open to talk about it. And I think his ease with what he lives with put them at ease. I think that's just a wonderful thing. To be able to relate. Not very many people have been through that type of accident that can relate their experience to a young child who's very comforted by seeing, oh look, here's an adult tearing it up as a rock climber in spite of losing a body part. That's pretty awesome.